Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to a what should hopefully be an interesting little live stream where I intend on taking a look at some of the most recent Assassin's Creed Valhalla footage. This is actually a 30-minute gameplay walkthrough that was made available at yesterday's, or certainly the recent Ubisoft Forward event, so called. And I'm intrigued. I'm still willing to see where this game ends up and how they balance some of the concerns that we've raised in previous live streams on Assassin's Creed Valhalla. But at the same time, there's quite a lot of there's quite a lot of curiousness and controversy that's surrounding this game. There's a few links that I've linked to below in terms of Ubisoft's general issues at the moment with senior management. In fact, one of the senior leaders of the team behind this game having to step down due to various controversies within the company. But also, lots of people are looking at this game, indeed people who've actually had their hands on uh, Assassin's Creed Valhalla already, and they're raising their eyebrow. They're kind of asking, "Is this still an Assassin's Creed game?" Um, one person, for example, played it for 3 hours and only assassinated one person. Now, of course, that's not my primary concern in this stream, but it's interesting in terms of the tone that's been increasingly the goal for the Assassin's Creed series has been much more of an RPG, which is fine. I'm a fan of RPGs, that's okay. A role play game, but also a little less of the historical accuracy. And indeed, some people, for example, have suggested that this game is a full-on step towards being akin to, say, The Witcher 3, incredibly popular and lauded game from CD Projekt Red, a Polish developer, uh, which is set in a fantasy universe. It's based on a series of books, I believe, by a Polish author, and this game is already being accused of moving towards that, as opposed to staying within something a bit more historically uh, recognizable, shall we say. Now, I'm deliberately just extending the preamble a little bit here. I started about 5 minutes before 3 o'clock, so I wanted to give people a chance to turn up, as sometimes the notification can be a little bit delayed. And also, actually, I'm feeling a little bit tired today. This morning I went to the dentist again. Last time when I was in there having that tooth pulled out, the lovely dentist, she's absolutely wonderful. She said, "Well, I'm not really happy with the work that I did the first time I met you. So the first time I met her, I was having a filling done, and she goes, so I'd like to replace that filling, for free, of course." She said, it's our error. Um, and yeah, so I went in today, and it turned out to be a slightly bigger job than she thought it was going to be, and it's people monkeying with your mouth. It's tiring, isn't it? Absolutely. Anyway, um, 1 minute until 3 o'clock, and then we will begin a little bit of a troll through uh, the presentation video. 31 minutes and 51 seconds is the length of the video. I'm hoping that Ubisoft are happy with people analyzing it in this way. I've seen a couple of people who have. So actually, frankly, I've seen several channels who've just straight lifted it and put it on their YouTube channel. So hopefully, people are okay with this one. But it was, and Ubisoft are okay with this one. But we shall see after the fact. But yeah, so if I seem as though at any point during this live stream as though I'm sort of mumbling or struggling to talk, it's just because my mouth's hurting. But I'll fight through. I'll fight through like a Viking. As the was it hashtag live like a Viking, think like a Viking. There's quite a few like a Viking hashtags at the moment linked with this game on Twitter, etc., etc. So that's 3 o'clock by my reckoning. Let's take a look at the Assassin's Creed Valhalla 30-minute gameplay preview video. And as Heath Ledger's Joker said, here we go. Oh, straight in there. Whoa, what? Okay, this is halfway through. Right in there, it's a mission, a Fury from the Sea. That's a nice reference to Sabres from the Fury of the Northmen, a Saxon monks begging God to save them from these men, and quite brutal. Now that whole thing of when you bash your enemy, numbers rising up from them, that's very RPG, you know. And now that is interesting. Honestly, I'm going to try not to stop so frequently, but I'm just wondering about that sword there. Also, using a massive hammer in combat, as that Saxon soldier was trying to, as far as we can tell, was a no-no. Didn't really happen. Now let's see. Can we stutter along here, frame by frame? Take a look at that sword. Ah, no! I skipped to a completely different video. Muppet. Need to watch where that mouse goes. So, okay. Brutal combat. Lots of RPG numbers being accrued, and so just frame by frame. Okay, yeah. So I thought it was like a great big cross guard on that sword, but no, that's okay. Quite a long sword.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Ubisoft Forward post show. My name is Yusuf McGeed, and this is Assassin's Creed Valhalla. We're going to take a deep dive into about 30 minutes of gameplay, and we're joined by a very special guest here.
Hey everyone, this is Philippe Bergeron, otherwise known as Fizz. I am the quest director on Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
So Fizz, we're setting up here for what looks like an epic encounter. Tell us exactly what's going on here.
Yeah, so here
What?
we're midway through the quest.
What happened
Setting
there?
up here for what looks like an epic encounter. Tell us
They
exactly
used
what's going on.
a ship as a battering ram. Wow.
Yeah, so
Now, interestingly, in history, we know that the Vikings, when they, for example, attacked London, and also York, actually, they did attack some Roman infrastructure in terms of bridges that were still standing, this kind of thing. But as far as we can tell, they pulled them down because they were in a state of disrepair or made of wood, for example, not necessarily fully made of stone. So, wood maybe on stone plinths, this kind of thing. So that but battering ram into a fortress wall, blimey.
here we're midway through the
Plus, that architecture is very, again, it's just a bit dodgy. But I don't want to tread over too much old ground.
the quest that we're showing.
No, sorry, a bit dodgy is wrong. It's completely wrong. But we'll hopefully we'll probably see more of it.
For UbiFWD. Here we're looking at the assault of Burg Castle. So these are big moments that usually sort of culminate at the end of the story. And so here Eivor, our Viking raider, is taking a group of raiders and Fyrds into Burg Castle
Battering
to
ram,
go
very
and
strange.
take down Rued and his clan.
So who exactly is Rued, and why does Eivor sort of want to pick a fight with him?
Basically, Rued comes into play about halfway through this story arc.
Now that's
At the
interesting.
beginning of
Sorry, just a second. The use of a bow at such close
Rued
quarters
and his clan.
as an option.
So who exactly is Rued, and why does Eivor sort of want to pick a fight with him?
Basically, Rued comes into
Yeah, that's a bit weird. There's a myth that Vikings never used bow and arrow in combat. That's not entirely true. There are stories in the sagas about essentially bad guys, untrustworthy or nasty people who beat their wives using bow and arrow as a measure of just how dishonorable they were, just how just slimy they were. I don't know. Would you use it like this in the? I don't know. Again, I don't want to be too much that guy. So let's keep on going.
About halfway through this story arc, where At the beginning of the arc,
Yeah.
this is something that happens before. Rued basically caused a lot of turmoil within the territory, and Oswald, who's the sort of elderman to inherit this territory, needs your help to take him down.
Now that's a good use of terminology. Elderman was a rank in the uh, in the kingdoms that would become England in the early medieval period. Um, an Anglo-Saxon social status. It's kind of, I suppose, kind of comparable to barons later on in the medieval period. Uh, and depending on, because in some cases, kings didn't always pass on their thrones to children. It was entirely possible to be an alderman elected to a kingship. So that's interesting. I wonder if that's actually Oswald of Northumbria. Oswald, who Saint Oswald, in fact, he's known primarily, actually, in terms of his life, for bringing Christianity to the north of England. Interestingly,
as well, having just been defeated in a previous quest, and so here this is revenge, but also accomplishing your ultimate goal.
So Fizz, as you're talking, we're seeing some of the combat
Fighting a
of
berserker.
Valhalla. Can you tell us a little bit about the changes to combat this time around?
We wanted to basically add a lot of new mechanics to it. So we added like some dual wielding for the player, like a stun system in there.
Good use of a shield.
And we really needed to do this to sort of portray that sort of the brutality that comes with being a Viking in this day and age. So it sort of fits into that the time and the
See now actually that's really, this is going to be a very archaeological detail to pick up on, but hang on, let's just see if we can get there. So the battering ram, just when he's saying the brutality of what it's like to fight with a Viking as a Viking. The siege warfare isn't really a Viking thing. Fully standing stone castles isn't really a Viking thing. It's just not. It's just wrong for the period. But something which I did quite like here is, of all things, this. Look at that. So this stone, this has clearly been sampled from a real period building, something like, for example, Escombe Church, because actually here we have, well, actually on the right-hand side we have thin, I guess, strata, I suppose, of bricks, layers of bricks, runs of bricks, relatively thin, with sometimes with a some sort of hint of like a stippled wash covering or something, or maybe old plaster. That's very Roman, thin bricks. Here we have more of that sort of surface, but crucially, these jagged lines are actually put into brickwork, stonework, in order to receive plaster on Roman buildings. So this is clearly supposed to be, certainly in the lower portions at least, a Roman structure that has been overtaken and presumably semi-repaired in wood by its occupants, which is a lovely idea. And we know that, for example, just across the river, actually from where I'm sitting, in a place called Jarrow, there's a monk, Benedict Biscop was his name, and he wanted to build, in his words, in the Roman style. He was aiming to build a church, a monastery in the Roman style. And that meant, actually, in many cases, stealing Roman bricks. Actually, Escombe Church, for example, the reason why I mentioned Escombe Church is that they have these stipples built into the stonework to receive plasterwork which came from a Roman fort and was put into a church. So some relatively small buildings um, would be made of stone, but moving into, well, actually we know from poetry, we know from archaeology that people didn't, the Saxons, Jutes, and Angles didn't move into Roman cities and just rebuild them. They actually lived on the edges of them. They often started new places, maybe a mile or two away from the old place. That happened here in Wallsend. So Segedunum is not where the Saxons lived. They actually started a new settlement called Wallesenda, just about a mile, 2 miles away from the Roman fort, in fact. Oh, hi, Christian. This game, the gameplay completely confirmed it to me that I don't want to touch this game anymore. Oh, okay. I've only just started watching it, so spoilers, I guess. The historic accuracy is also a turn off. Yeah, well, Yeah, I'm trying to give the game its dues. That's why I've paused on this very particular strange screen here to go, look at that. The fast bow. Precisely, yes. I was just talking about the bow. Using the bow like that in combat, it's just not a it wasn't a period thing. But anyway, this is a little positive. This little thing, these little striations on the wall here, I like them.
In the character.
Now, interestingly, actually, the use of the sword there was completely wrong as well. The axe, an axe is an axe. You chop, 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 chop. Fair enough. Stabbing with these swords is unlikely to have been how you would normally fight with them. But then again, this guy, he's fighting inverted commas, doesn't have any weapons or a shield, so maybe it's okay just to stab him in the gut. That whole biking thing, isn't it? It's the biker
Oswald.
Vikings.
He lives.
Oh, Oswald.
Oswald lives!
Eivor, is that you? Shut your ass, twig spine.
Here, Eivor has taken her entire army through the assault, and finally, it's revealed that our Elderman, our ally, Oswald, is still alive, and Rued has him captive.
So this is what it comes to, Wolfkist? Two Danes fighting over a filthy Saxon whoreson? If this
Interesting.
swine is your prize, come and get him.
No, I quite like the fact that Rued has
Now
a
that we've
Sayax on
seen
his
that
belt
Oswald
there.
is alive,
A little
we have
detail.
Rued within our sights. What's the next step here?
So the next move for Eivor is to finally face off against Rued. She has her allies. They
All of
can
this
take
is
care of
just
the rest of
wrong. This ruined floor here. It doesn't even look like a Roman floor, frankly, if this is meant to be a Roman thing that's been rebuilt. As far as we can tell, this use of this wood in this way is not period accurate.
army. Now it's time to go one-on-one against Rued in one of our boss battles, actually.
Oh, hunting
Battle
wolf.
is not yet won, Oswald.
And it's worth pointing out, actually, that here what we're showing is the player going and facing off against Rued aggressively, but we tend to always have to support a 360-degree approach in these things.
Oh,
So
I
the player
quite
could
like
have
the
approached this a
I
little
quite
bit
like
more stealthily
Rued's
and gotten
little
at least
house
like a good
though,
critical
little
hit
tent
on either
back
Rued
there.
or his wolf, and so
Hang
you
on,
can play this a little
they'll-
bit more strategically if that's your playstyle.
They'll let it turn around again.
So we're not only fighting Rued here, but also his pet wolf?
Yeah, how rude
Here,
of Rued
one
to
of
use
my
a
preferred
wolf.
strategies is to eliminate the wolf first, just focus fire on him. It takes at least one opponent out of the
There you go. I like that. That's quite cool. That's frankly, this sort of triangular setup is something that I do believe is seen on the um on the Bayeux Tapestry. Don't quote me on that, but I think it is. There's good evidence for it, and also it's something that you often see at reenactors gatherings. They'll sort of turn up often with actually only one side of the triangle will be on one end of the tent, and the back will just be, so one side will be fabricked, and the other side will also have fabric, but that'll be sort of on two poles, almost like a parasol, so people can come in and buy the wares or whatever of the reenactor. But yeah, again,
combat. Now, Rued
trying to
will
give it some sort of
have
dues.
extra abilities that come into play if you do eliminate his wolf, but I think having one opponent less in the battlefield makes for a good strategy in the whole.
Some of what these guys talk about just really just come across as filler, doesn't it? Then again, an awful lot of what I'm going to say in this live stream will be filler, so it could come across as filler.
Valhalla is my destiny. That fate will not be met today. Why does
Epic
should be
talk.
ruled, wolf-kissed? Made thralls, not treated as equals. We are better than this, than all of them.
God, what the hell is that sword? Sorry, I was so distracted by and that axe. Frankly, the axe is stupid. But what the hell is that sword? That's a almost triple-handed. Oh, it's approaching a claymore. That thing. That's just ridiculous. The guard is wrong for this. This is meant to be 9th century. You know, that sort. Okay, let's carry on. Also, all this stuff, you know, the rings and the leather, it's straight out of TV design, film design, isn't it? So it's the sort of thing you might see in, uh, well, actually, in The Lost Kingdom. I was talking to an archaeologist who isn't as much into the Saxon and Viking period, the late first millennium AD in Europe, as I am, and he was saying, so is there much wrong with the Last Kingdom? Is that this is like at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning, and I just gave him this huge list to read. I was like, well, here's a list. Let me tell you the ways in which that TV series boils my blood. Anyway,
Do not drag
weird
me
sword.
down to the sewage you wallow in.
Yes, again, fight tooth and nail for a Saxon.
Oh, why is all that nonsense dialogue?
You'd throw in with these wastrels? These Argive swine?
Eivor, no! He should be tried before God, a lawful assembly.
Yeah, that's very Oswaldy.
Alright, so we've defeated Ruid,
Or at least
we've
classic
freed
Saint Oswald.
Oswald. What comes next?
Oswald, in this case, prefers for Ruid to be kept alive, and so you basically have to choose: are you going to go against his wishes or stay true to your nature?
So we have this choice to make, but before we get into that, I want to rewind a little bit because we just did this big, grand assault, but Eivor couldn't have done it alone. She clearly had to recruit some folks along the way, get some troops, get some allies. So let's actually rewind and see how we went about first gathering those troops.
Right. So when coming up to an assault,
Are these people meant to be people living in burnt out Roman
Get some troops, get some allies.
buildings, like in
So
a
let's actually
squalor?
rewind and see how we went about first gathering those.
I saw a cartoon the other day, and I shared it on the RKC Facebook page, where they said it was a joke about how Hollywood goes about filming the medieval period. This, of course, not quite being medieval, this being earlier, but you know, you'll have people in bright costumes and looking essentially quite nice. And what they do is go, quick, add more mud, and you know, put a filter on the camera, make it really grimy and rubbish. And that is definitely not a Saxon building. It's got what looks like plaster on the outside, covered in moss, which actually, little tick here, little ping, would be that for example, in the poem "The Ruin," there's a description of frost in the plaster, mold, and other things appearing on the walls of Roman ruins. But the idea, and as far as we can tell from remains that we find in these buildings, people might have visited them out of curiosity every now and then, but they wouldn't be living in them. Not unless they were outcasts or homeless or something, or frankly, truly desperate. Um, and that's a really shoddy attempt to fix up a Roman building to be lit. It's
right. So
not
when
right.
coming up to an assault,
because look, people don't. It's just meant to be like a diseased town. There's dead animals all over the place. I mean, maybe this is just a old abandoned Roman vicus, but
it's a game of numbers. Eivor can go into pretty much any location and be a stealthy Viking, eliminating some of the assets, which ultimately would be a strategy. You can do that, and you'll have some of the ingredients or of the assets there that will have been sabotaged, but you still need an army. So here what we're seeing is Eivor going around the countryside and raising what we call a fyrd, which is the men and the women of the territory who come up and fight in the name of a king. So here Eivor is going around and trying to convince people to fight in the name of Oswald to finally take down the oppressor that is Ruid.
Defending East Anglia, defending you. Will you not do the same?
What? Die in defense of a lost cause?
Yeah, so she's
Lost
really
cars.
using, like, the image and like the leadership that Oswald had, what he meant to the people in his name. She's going to recruit these people.
Pretty words, Dane. But the men of Theovard have their own battles to fight.
So we're told by this Reeve that there are troops, there are allies that he could add to our cause. But first, we sort of need to do him a favor. Is that right?
Yeah, so obviously these people have been run down by Rued and the impact he's had on the territory, so I think a lot of these people have sort of lost hope. And so you need to show them that there is hope. And so here Eivor is basically helping them take back one of their prized locations by taking a couple men and raiding a nearby township, basically taking it back for the people and showing that there's a reason to continue fighting.
There's a heck of a horn
and then
pose.
get them on your side.
Now, interestingly, I mean, this is interesting in terms of a raiding party. Actually, let's see how many people there
Taking
are.
it back for the people.
So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yeah, that's basically a raiding party. That's a raiding party could be, I guess, between 5 and 13 people. Skirmishes, sort of small battles, could be up to sort of maybe 25 people on per side ish. The scale of combat in this period was very small, and this is quite interesting seeing this play out. I wonder how this will play out. Let's see.
That there's a reason to continue fighting and then get
Kingsbury.
them on your side.
Yeah, okay. Now, oh, actually, sorry, there you go. There's an interesting little archaeological bit there. So here we have, this is what they're hinting at here. Again, presumably Roman stuff, which has been repurposed with these wooden platforms inside. That is not bad. That's not too bad. If they're going to live within Roman ruins, literally on top of them, this isn't too bad, actually. The stakes on the side here, okay. And actually, again, just to give this game a little bit of its dues as well, a little bit more of that. One of the reasons why so many stories at this time were
Taking it back.
were about sort of monsters and adventurers and this kind of thing was because actually raiders could come in from almost anywhere. Again, just talking about local to where I'm living now, what was wetland is now all been drained and it's basically housing estates, etc. But what was wetlands around the Jarrow Monastery and also actually across the river into Wall's End could be quite treacherous. So actually, even just the environment itself was dangerous. The getting from place to place was arduous, and you wouldn't do it, for example, at night necessarily. You wouldn't want to anyway. And the fact is that people could row up the river, for example, the Tyne in this case, get into the wetlands and just turn up on your doorstep. So yeah, okay.
People and showing that there's a reason to continue fighting and then get them on your side.
I like the colours on the boat, as promised. It's annoying, but Odin Site, you can highlight nearby enemies. Odin Site. Really not sure how I feel about the XP numbers, the life draining numbers on the combat.
When Eivor does this, obviously you have access to a full suite of abilities. So again, the improvements that we've done to the fight system. You have some brutal axe throwing in there. You have archery or like range combat abilities in there as well. So really, again, like depending on what your playstyle is, you can customize your loadout and go in there how you wish.
Do you know something that I used to reflect on a lot when I worked at the Jorvik Viking Center is how sort of the heroic combat that we hear described again, for example, in sagas and stories of various notable warriors and their adventures is but obviously it's embellished after the fact to emphasize skill. So the idea being that skill is what gets you through a conflict such as this. Incidentally, here we see again an interesting mishmash of stuff. This is probably also based on actually something like Escombe Church, because you have slightly later than sort of almost approaching something like a Norman kind of doorway, but with the square door, that's a bit odd. It's interesting though. Anyway, the problem is that in actual, yeah, it's dangerous. It's really dangerous in actual combat. Um, the shields that these guys are carrying do shatter, and I do believe that's built into this game, which is quite good because wood and versus metal doesn't last all that long. Um, but the swinging of weaponry can have so many unintended consequences. One of the reasons why we were so carefully trained when we worked there, when it came to letting the public handle weapons, or for example in the summer they probably still do, family combat events outside, so kids can have a go and maybe fight a Viking, and the Viking obviously normally loses to the kids. But there's an awful lot that goes into that, an awful lot of consciousness, of awareness of what's going on around you. This idea of spontaneous, movementy, sort of highly choreographed sort of fighting just doesn't map onto these types of weapons. Um, and if you do what Ivor is doing in this game, you're going to get a random blow to the head and die. It's interesting to see this sort of thing happening, and I'm sure that's the case in an awful lot of, for example, Hollywood portrayals of, say, Japanese medieval combat as well. Samurai and those kind of thing. I've seen some interesting videos from sword experts, Japanese sword experts, masters, in fact, watching classic martial arts movies, and they also often get it wrong in the name of choreography, and I guess that's to be expected in a computer game, isn't it? So I missed your comment here. How did they get a battering ram on wheels on their ships? That's a good question. That's a good question. Good question. How did they get it on their ships, or how did they just make one on the beach?
Chris, we just saw
It's an
this
interesting
giant
question.
pulse go out. What exactly was that?
That's quite good. The pointy windows as opposed to curved. Pointy was a phase that they went through in terms of it's an early attempt at replicating archways that would later become something like a Gothic archways. That's interesting in terms of architecture.
So that is what we call the Odin Site. The Odin Site is basically
The size of
our
those glass
interpretation
windows is
of
way too big.
the Eagle Vision from previous games, and we thought it was good to sort of bring that back. It's basically
much
Eivor's
glass.
intuition. It's how she perceives the world. When the player uses that, it'll highlight basically interactive objects, like things
Double
that will bring her an
hammers.
advantage. So we'll have
Silly.
arrows, like health consumables that are in there. So it really is like a good way of sort of understanding the world and showing you like things that you can go and touch.
Chest.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of things we can touch, we just picked up this awesome new weapon.
It's something we wanted to play with on Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where we have fewer weapons in the game, but you can invest in them more, so they become your
Right,
weapon.
yes, break
and
the
so
windows.
depending on what your preferred playstyle is or your preferred weapon type, then you can go and choose, I'm gonna fight with this weapon and invest heavily into that.
Not only are we looting weapons, but we see something here called the Book of Knowledge. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
They unlock skills for the player. So here you can see the Valkyrie dive that has just been unlocked. We have these spread out throughout the world. So again, to promote exploration and discovery, as you travel through the world and you explore locations, you can find these books that will add abilities that you can go and invest in, put into your loadout, then go into the different locations or the different quests in the game and use those depending on what your playstyle is.
Yeah, see, they're putting bits of Gothic
Now
architecture
we've
like these
recaptured
spires
this
here.
village, we've secured more troops for our assault. Let's jump back now
Comedy horn on
and
top.
figure out what we want to do with Ruid.
The rightful king of East Anglia has spared your life today, and so it will be.
Compassion is a virtue suited for anyone, Eivor, including you. Thank you.
Eivor decided to let him live. Ruud is really angry about that. Being a Norse Viking, being put to the death in battle is your road to Valhalla, so he was basically denied access to Valhalla in this situation. Obviously, all of these decisions come into play later on in the game, so...
What is that meant to be, that tall tower in the middle there? Okay.
We have
Definitely not
very
Roman.
difficult decisions for the player to make. We didn't want to have easy decisions.
Yeah, you know, when I was playing, I decided to listen to Oswald and spare Ruid's life, but What exactly is the relationship like between Eivor and Oswald?
So the relationship between Eivor and Oswald is an alliance. It's basically Eivor is surrounded by territories that initially getting into England are hostile towards her, and obviously if you want to set up a new settlement, you want to make sure that your
clothing
neighbor
is
is friendly.
ridiculous.
So here in East Anglia, Oswald is the man for the job, where putting him into a position of power would help her sort of secure her territory. So
Also, it's a small thing, but this is slightly bothering me. How is that shield attached to Oswald's back?
you want to make sure
Very
that your
small,
neighbor
but
is friendly. So here in East Anglia, Oswald is the man for the job, where putting him into a
Yep.
position of power would help her sort of secure her
floating there.
territory. So earlier on to the territory, Eivor comes in here, meets Oswald. The problems he had with Rued are sort of put to light, and going through the arc, you basically help him deal with Rued and aligning basically Danes with Saxons in one territory.
So, Fizz, we've completed the assault. We've gotten our hands dirty with some combat, taken down Rued. We have this big open region of East Anglia, so before we head off to Oswald's wedding, what do you say we head out, have some fun, and see what we can get into in the open world?
That sounds great.
So I think that was passing through a Roman gatehouse
So
there.
we see a cat here with a speech bubble above it, and you best believe if you let me talk to a cat, I'm gonna talk to a cat.
Yeah, these are some of our some of my favorite moments actually in the game, where we put out a whole bunch of events throughout the territory. And it sort of rewards, again, exploration, going around. It's a chance for us also to sort of showcase a different side of Eivor. A lot of the quests sort of deal more with like politics and warfare, and this shows a slightly more human nature to her. So it permits us to explore that character a little bit more.
This is all looking very much like Assassin's Creed
So
Odyssey, isn't
here, basically, like you're trying to help a kid with his cat, and ultimately get that cat to sort of join your crew as a cat raider.
You just said cat raider way too casually. You're telling me I could have a cat Viking raider on my longship?
That's exactly what I'm telling you.
Oh my god, yes, I love it. Perfect.
Well, and actually, that's based in actual archaeology, as far as we can tell. Not that, not that every Viking ship had a cat on it, but it's clear from genetics of animal. I think cats. I think some dogs, and some other small furry creatures. Can't remember them all. That some of them were brought across from Scandinavia and also other parts of the world at around about this time, probably through trade, and also probably maybe even through having a lucky cat on board your raiders ship. So yeah.
Yeah, as you're riding around the rivers of England, you would see a cat basically walking around your longship, keeping your Viking raiders company.
You know, speaking of the Viking Longship, we're seeing some of that gameplay here now. Can you talk a little bit about how that works and functions in Valhalla?
Yeah, so starting out on this project, I think the Viking Longship is one of the biggest images that we all have when we think about Vikings in our game. And so Vikings had this awesome design for longship that had a very shallow hull, so it permitted them to go very far inland very quickly, and you could basically disembark Viking raiders like on pretty much any shore. We added that into the game, where you can basically sail up to any location and then just decide to disembark with your guys and raid a location, loot all its treasure, get back in the ship, and then continue sailing down the river to your next opportunity.
So I know past Assassin's Creed games allowed for songs and things like that to be sung on ships. Will Valhalla have a similar version of that?
Yeah, so this is something we actually wanted the crew of your ship to become
Tell
like
stories,
your
maybe.
home away from home. So we added stories and songs into the ship. So basically, as the player is going around, you could decide to have your skald sort of sing a song for you as you row down the river. But you can also decide, depending on who the raiders are in your ship, to hear more about their life. So you can actually queue up stories, and they'll give you a little bit more background on who they are. So you get to know your sort of fighters as you're traveling around the world, which is a cool moment.
I wonder how repetitive that will be.
So here we're seeing a
Well, I'm quite liking, just before we hear what this guy has to say about it, I'm quite liking the unmanaged nature of the rivers. These aren't courses that have been cut by later water management, in particular, for example, in Britain, in England, especially post, sort of post Norman England, you'd have the main landowners, which often in the case of waterways, you would end up being the church, commissioning rivers to be widened and deepened and straightened and made more ruly. But so far, we're seeing some fairly realistic waterways, which, again, I'm glad I'm not just here just to crap on the game. It's good, like I'm kind of enjoying some parts as well. Actually, I think some of the details that are utterly incidental to what they necessarily want you to enjoy. But we'll see. Let's see what he has to say.
Bit of a different view. What exactly are we looking at?
We had this on previous Assassins where you would
Just run over the
ride
duck
on your horse and you could pull out, have the horse sort of follow the track. We have a similar thing for the ship where you can put up your sails. It's cruise control for the ship, so you can pull back, take in the scenery, listen to some songs or some stories, and just take it all in.
Sorry, ruined castle on a promontory. It's just like they just drop these things in the landscape that have no business being
Viking
there.
songs, we have an activity here that's not exactly singing, but kind of related, right?
Yeah, so here what we have is what we call flighting, which was an activity that Norse people would partake in. They would like to have a battle of wits and sort of poetry where insults would be thrown back and forth between each other. The idea was to try and have a good insult, but also to have a good rhythm and a good rhyme in there. So it's basically a precursor to rap battles.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Here's the silver. Now
Being
begin.
witty was very important, especially in a time before television.
To all those whom I speak, they say Eivor's a clod.
You're speaking about
Then
me?
you're speaking to fools and their knowledge is flawed.
Ah.
How exactly do you go about being successful in one of these?
The trick behind a good flight was to choose the right insult, identifying the right cadence, and then trying to find what rhymed the best.
Mistaken, I'm known for my might.
Interesting. Silent whispers all claim that you're terribly dense.
No one would
Then
say
you've
that.
clearly misheard them. My wit is immense.
Oh, you looked out with that one. Well, what a surprise.
And you just
Eivor
impressed
of
the guy
Raven
with a...
clan is a true talent. I'm shocked.
Don't believe everything you hear, unless it touches on my flighting. Then heed every word.
Take the coin.
So now that we've proven our sharp tongue and wit, I think it's time for a bit more relaxing activities.
That
We're
was
fishing here.
okay. That was pretty good,
that's
actually.
it. So we gave Eivor a fishing line, so you can actually throw out a line.
Well, just a second, the fishing. This is quite, again, interesting if they're going for that. People living in Roman ruins look, again, this looks like an authentic Roman ruin. The thing is, why didn't they show more of this sooner? Why did they rush for the massive siege warfare in that so-called gameplay trailer that they did? Was it a couple of months ago now? This is much less offensive. Shall we say.
And go catch and fish.
Archaeologist.
This is used basically to play into our new health loop where the player will lose health in the world, and it doesn't automatically regenerate like we would have in the past. So you actually have to go out and get some supplies. So you'll find mushrooms and some food that you can gather. But here, like you can also catch some fish and consume that to regain some health. We also will sometimes have it in certain
hang on
quests.
just
So
a second,
it's a
let me
good
just go back just a sec.
mushrooms and some food that you can gather. But here, like you can also catch some fish and consume that to regain some health.
This is the camera
We
spin
also
round.
will sometimes have it in certain quests, so it's a good way to sort of chill out on the side of the water and just again take it all in.
No.
Fishing here.
Yeah, that's a fishing line, so you can
Come
actually
on.
throw out a line and go catch some fish. This is used basically to play into our new health loop where the player will lose health in the world, and it doesn't automatically regenerate like we would have in the past. So you actually have to go out and
Okay, so that's meant to be again a Roman waterfront that's being lived in. Okay.
get some supplies. So
I mean, it's the number of flaws as well. I mean, the thing is, again, this is where this period must possibly just isn't suitable for an Assassin's Creed game. You know, you need that verticality to have all of the free running, which is a staple of the series. But then again, also jumping off roofs and jabbing people with your hidden blade just doesn't seem to be a priority in this game, uh, anyway. So again, I'm just
you'll
wondering
find
why are they doing
mushrooms
some of this stuff?
and some food that you can gather. But here, like you can also catch some fish and consume that to regain some health. We also will sometimes have it in certain quests, so it's a good way to sort of chill out on the side of the water and just again take it all in. So this is what we call one of our offering altars. So the idea is that you find these around the world and you make offerings to it. So it'll take like animal parts and stuff that you can find throughout the world. Here what you're seeing though is sort of like a fancy version of it, where as you do your offering you get interrupted by some kids that basically come and steal your stuff. So it's just a way for us to sort of showcase that like the systems and the activities in the world can sort of play in with some quests and some little events. So it's our way to sort of dress up these moments and make it all fit inside the whole experience.
Yeah, this seemed like a really sort of unexpected turn for what I thought was going to be kind of a simple interaction.
Yeah, and it's really what we were trying to do with these events is to give another dimension to Eivor, other than just, you know, the pure rar Viking or the politician. Because you can imagine at some point that will grow old if you're always telling that version of the character. So it lets us really go into the depth of who is Eivor, what motivates her, how she can interact with the world outside of warfare and politics.
But your stealth needs work.
We were close.
And it also showcases like a different facet of the world at the same time. It's not only Eivor. So it just widens the breadth of the stories that we can tell.
So who exactly are these two children?
These are kids of East Anglia. They are going through tough times with whatever Rued's been doing to the territory. And so they're just here trying to survive and basically exploit the people that are there to make offerings.
It was kind of nice to see that Eivor wasn't really necessarily upset at them for stealing, and, you know, after you talk to them, you have the choice of helping them. You can, you know, give them food, give them some money, or, you know, maybe just say, hey, good luck, on your way.
Yeah, and then this is something we also wanted to do a lot. Like, so here we're doing an event, we do it in quests as well, but we want to give a lot of this agency into players' hands so that they can sort of shape Eivor a little bit. Who she is, so it represents them a little bit more, and they can roleplay that a little bit better. And again, it just gives her like a little bit more humanity in these moments.
What large walkers should do. Provide for small walkers.
Here, large walker.
A necklace.
Yes, it's a St. Martin seal. You're welcome here anytime, large walker. You're one of us now. Visit us, okay?
I will. Take care now, small green walkers.
So I think AC veterans might recognize this here, but what exactly is
Okay.
Eivor chasing down?
Yeah, so here you're seeing Eivor running down one of our tattoo images. So this is challenging the player on free run abilities, but also for fans of the series, sort of pulling at their heartstrings for some beloved features.
So
what they're admitting there is that the game, the franchise really has moved on from what it used to be, and is now something completely different. Which I suppose is okay. But it's interesting that they're having to sort of turn it into a gameplay
tattoo
feature.
Eivor?
Yes, by collecting these tattoos, you actually bring them back to your settlement, and then you can customize different body parts, having different tattoos everywhere. So again, another form of expression, and it's sort of to represent that Viking culture.
Fizz, one of my favorite things when I was just out there exploring East Anglia was coming upon a house or a building and realizing that there was a chest inside, but that there was no easy way in. And in this case, I saw all the doors were barred, but I knew that because there was a chest in there, there must have been some way to get inside. So I went
What
around the
is
back
that?
and, found a way in.
Yeah, I'm
Was
glad
that
you
a,
actually caught on to that. You're pointing at something
a
that we wanted to
viewfinder on the
work
bow
on
and
a
arrow?
lot on Valhalla, where we wanted the exploration to make you feel smarter. So we played a lot with puzzle solving, so making sure that every house that you find sort of appeals to you, like it draws your attention, and then when you want to come and explore, it's not given to you. You still have to work for it a little bit, so it'll challenge you on your observation skills, logic, just trying to find how do I get into this. So we play a lot with level design, quest design, to offer challenges to players, and you basically come out of it like with a better feeling for the exploration, but you also get to see more of a story behind any of these locations which we've crafted. So it gave us a little bit more time to sort of slow down the experience and tell a different version of a story.
A poor victim of someone's fury.
Yeah, I mean, speaking about exploration and just finding things out in the world, I was just wandering and came across this clearing and found this kind of morbid altar.
Yeah, so this is one of our bigger events that we have scattered in the world. So as Eivor explores, she can find altars like this, and by interacting with them, here it's a trap that's been set by this character named Regan. Now, there's a bigger story behind all this. There's multiple steps to it later on. So this is one of the moments. It permits us to go into a slightly more mystical realm and play with a boss fight that has more magical abilities, if we will.
Oh,
and
magical abilities.
Have this awesome boss fight in the middle of the swamps.
Oh, come on. Magical abilities. I mean, the thing is, I suppose all the way through this, I've found some positives and some things which are quite nice. But the truth is, everything is just a bit wrong, and it's a real shame. So, like that house we were just in, the architecture there was completely wrong. It looked more like an Appalachian wood cabin than it did an East Anglian Saxon house. In this instance, okay, maybe what Ivor's just consumed is some sort of hallucinogenic, but
and so here the abilities that you see
what's
Reagan
going on
using,
here?
like, are a little bit on the mystical side of things. What's happening is Eivor at the beginning in that trap is poison, and so she starts sort of hallucinating, seeing the world in a sort of different light and filter, and so that's sort of what lets us go into the realm of the weird.
My rage, spirit of my father's rage, fill me!
But again, I guess cinematographically, if that's a word, it's good for the camera. The music is quite good, although actually it's funny. We've had I've seen a few people praise the music, but the music is good in so much as it reminds us of.
So we just saw here that
Regan
belongs
the same
to
bands
something called the Daughters of Lyria.
And the same music which we see, for example, in the Vikings TV series and in other related media, is using that kind of I've forgotten what the term is now, but essentially a revival of certain ways of trying to make sounds that we see in, for example, Wardruna, as a band. So it's good, but it's modern. Actually,
yeah, that's correct. By finding the other daughters, we'll get a little bit more backstory on who they are, so we don't want to spoil that too much. But it creates like a sort of greater story that is not on the main path in any way, but it is still very rich and adds to the lore of this world and actually plays into history.
That's quite pretty.
We just had a really
plays
exciting,
into
really
history.
intense boss battle. I think it's time for something a little bit more relaxing and calming now.
Yeah, it's all about pacing yourself with the highs and the lows. So here we have a low chill moment of what we call building a cairn. So Eivor, as she explores the world, will find these sort of meditative areas where
we're going to try and balance
you have
rocks, are we?
a pile of rocks that you could just stack on on top of another using physics. And I mean, yeah, the ultimate goal is to try and get the highest pile of rocks, but really it's about taking in the sights, relaxing, taking a step back, and just building something.
Together we stack stones into cairns.
These?
Yes. Think of this as a test of mind and wit. Stack the cairn stones high and wide into any shape you like.
I mean, you can spend as much time as you want building these things, making them as high as you want, as weird as you
How
want.
exciting is
I'm
this?
sure like a lot of these stuff will end up on the internet, like people comparing structures. And the cool thing is that once you've built it and you decide to get out of it,
I don't know. What do you think, chat? Do you think that people are going to be making cairn building videos and comparing them? And pimp my cairn, check my cairn out. I don't know. It's an interesting little added addition. I'm not sure precisely why it's in this game and what it has to do with anything that we've seen so far. Really, it's a physics demo, isn't it? But anyway, 53 minutes late, Google. Ah, sorry, Beck. Gutted. Well, it's been interesting, and the things I've liked about it so far have been incredibly niche. You know, very so.
That's yours, right? And until the moment where you come back and you want to build a new one, it's sort of cool that we were able to give that to players to express themselves.
At this point in the demo, we've explored East Anglia, we've met some children, we've broken into a house, we fought a boss, we built a cairn. I think now it's finally time to go and head off to Oswald's wedding.
Yeah, so this is the moment it's all been building up to. By the moment you get into the territory, it's sort of like mentioned by Oswald that he's trying to get married with his Dane lady. And so as you go through the arc, that's sort of like the underlying thread. Really, it's about Rued creating turmoil in the territory and helping Oswald sort of get above that. And
He keeps using the word territory as opposed to kingdom. Why? I don't understand. I don't get it. And you'll watch back to see my thoughts later. Well, actually, the thing about this live stream is that I didn't watch this before. I'm watching it for the first time, so there's been lots of me reacting and sort of shaking my head a little bit, and I'm trying to just in this one, as opposed to previous live streams where I've been overwhelmingly and fairly forcefully negative. I've been trying to pick out things which are interesting, but this all just again the church just looks bad, you know.
Finally, after
such
going
a shame.
through all of that arc, finally get these two together, go
That
through
bow.
their wedding, and you're invited to attend the ceremony, and then all the activities and fun times that comes afterwards.
Yeah, as much as we've seen the brutal side of England, it's nice to see, you know, the joyous side of it as well.
Yeah, and it's something we really want.
I wonder if it's going to be called England in the game, because it shouldn't be. England did not exist at this point in history, but you know, we'll see.
Wanted to play on in Valhalla, where being a Viking is not only about being a raider or a warrior. I mean, there's revelry, there's feasting, there's partying that goes, and like if someone knows how to party, it's a Viking. And so here, this is one of our opportunities to sort of show what a sort of Viking gathering is. And what's cool here is it's a good alliance of Norse culture with Saxon culture, sort of smashing those two things together and building bridges.
Yeah, I mean, what's a wedding without some drunk archery, right?
Yeah, so like, anything can happen in a Viking event, right? Eivor, yeah, here just get...
What is a Viking event? Anything can happen in a Viking event, right? What does that mean? What does that like? What does that mean?
Drunks and shoot some arrows.
I wonder why she's called Wolf Kissed. I wonder.
Steady all, and ready yourself for the wedding race. The king and his bride against all.
My king. He...
Oh no.
So here we see the decision I made to spare Rued came back to bite us.
Yep, that's the decision you made, coming back. So as we said before, all of your decisions have consequences, and this is a big one.
challenge you.
I accept.
You're basically presented with the option to sort of step in for Oswald, fight the fight for him, or let him go and fight his own fight.
Yeah,
Sword on his
personally,
back.
I chose to fight.
Now, interestingly, the sword on the back that Ruud's got there, this is something that often comes up. People often want to have a sword on their back. Again, it's very Witcher to do that. And it's clear that people in the past, some people did, because there are specific instructions in sword manuals. This is much later, though, obviously in medieval times. Sword manuals saying why you shouldn't do that. So clearly, some people would do enough to do it. And there are various reasons in terms of quick access to the blade, the ability of the risk of hurting yourself or others around you as you're taking it off your back and spinning it, to get it into position. That whole movement is quite big and wide, and you're leaving yourself open to a quick attack from someone else. Yeah, there's all sorts of reasons why you wouldn't have a sword on your back. But it's interesting that that's not I'm not criticizing this game for having the sword on his back. Because actually it's clear that some people did, and maybe that's just that demonstrates Ruud's
Myself, because
rudeness.
I thought Eivor is the type of person who likes to finish what she started.
Plank by plank, and a dead king cannot keep his oaths. Let me finish this.
Oswald, you gutless Arya swine!
On the other side of that hand is
I'll
ridiculous.
slay the wolf-kissed, then hang you with your own tongue.
How does this encounter with Ruud differ from our previous fight with him?
So at this point, you've eliminated his wolf, so it's just him, and so he's angry at this point, and so he will start using his big gun abilities like fairly earlier on in the fight.
Big gun
So it's way more vicious, way faster. There's less strategy. He goes literally swords blazing at you, and
What
so
the hell is
this
that
is
sword?
a fight
That's
to
like
the death.
7 foot tall. It's ridiculous. His trousers are good. His baggy trousers. That's quite good for a Viking.
And of course here, like, this is a decision you made to go and fight him, but there's multiple outcomes to this scenario. You could have let Oswald fight his own fight and prove basically his station as the rightful leader.
Now,
if you had eliminated Ruud, obviously this would not have happened. It would have been a slightly more joyous occasion. But ultimately, Oswald fight his
now
own.
interestingly, we've talked in previous videos. I remember talking with Professor Howard Williams about horns on helmets, and we talked about actually how now the modern horn on a helmet is these sorts of hairstyles, very short around the back and sides, long hair on top. Now, we know, for example, the Normans had, so sort of post in this country 1066. We see it on the Bayeux Tapestry, and it's designed to keep nits and things away from your head. So maybe you might have stuff living on your clothes if you've been traveling for a long time, or if you work in the field. But with very short hair around the back of your head and up towards the top. Of course, I have less and less choice in how much hair I have on my head. You're less likely to have bugs migrate into your hair. But some of the hairstyles that we see here, Ruud here, Oswald's wife has a very, very harsh, sort of almost like a comb over on one side and a shaved head on the other. This stuff is simply, again, it's a very modern thing, very modern take on some of this stuff. And so, also actually the leather arm braces there, that's a very modern, again, costume design thing to do. It's just not accurate. And I mean, as Beck says there, I remember when Assassin's Creed was touted as being quite accurate. Well, me too. And this is the reason why I'm so upset about this, is that not only do I love this period and it's being woefully misrepresented in so many ways, but also crucially, I remember, in previous Assassin's Creed games, they would travel to places just to scan the environments, just to record it and have it playable and useful and interesting. And I mean, I think they obviously took liberties. I mean, probably Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, I think. is probably where it started to shift and become more gamey in that sense, the way it used the scanned and historic environment. But in this instance, they've gone full. Well, as one of the articles in the video description below says, they're going full Witcher, and that's a real
fight,
shame.
and prove basically his station as the rightful leader. If you had eliminated Rued, obviously this
Nice
would not
simple
have
crown,
happened.
though.
It would have
That's
been
quite
a
nice.
slightly more joyous occasion. But ultimately, in all scenarios, you still have an alliance with Oswald. He's proven to be the right leader for this territory, and to be a good ally for you.
I promised you an alliance, and now you have it.
And one day I will need you to make good on that alliance.
So we're about to take off from the wedding, but Eivor decides it's a good idea to check up on her friend Finner.
Yeah, so Finner is probably one of the more recurring characters in this arc. You get to meet him very early on. He's a very endearing character, sort of used to have a Viking life, sort of misses it, and going through all these adventures together is sort of like lights that fire back.
Quite a good
and
beard
so
he's got going
he's
there.
willing
It's
to
quite a
join
well
you in your
represented
raiders.
beard with the
So
beads
he's
on
one
it.
of many raiders that you'll
Wet
encounter
bunches
in
just
the
above
game,
the
and you
bead.
can sort of recruit, bring back home, and then have them sort of join you on your adventures on Longship. He can tell you these stories that we're telling you about. You get to know a little bit more about him. So again, it's a fun way to sort of discover more about these characters that you meet and bring him along for adventures.
Together.
I'll gather my things.
Well, folks, we've come to the end of our Assassin's Creed Valhalla playthrough. Fizz, thank you so much for joining us. When and where can people play it?
Assassin's Creed Valhalla will be out on Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5, and is coming to Xbox One, PlayStation 4, PC, and Stadia on November 17th.
Stadia, yeah.
Assassin's Creed Valhalla, available November 17th.
I don't know. I'm not impressed. I mean, as Christian was saying at the beginning, the gameplay
Basically,
has definitely put him off playing. In my case, it's made me less concerned about some of the aesthetics that we've seen in previous things, and little details like this rap battle essentially between people trying to compare their wits and come out on top is quite nice. Also, little details like this architecture here, it specifically actually reminds me of there's a what's it called? I think it's called the Pentangle Tower in York, which is it pentangular? That's the wrong. Is that the right word? No, that's is it the octangle tower? Roman Tower, York. There we go. And you have this sort of band of red brick in the grey brick. And interestingly, actually, what you have here lower down is Roman, part of the Roman wall of the city of York, or Iberacum, as it was known to the Romans. And then higher up, you have medieval additions. None of this stuff was, as far as we can tell, wasn't necessarily added in the time that was it's being portrayed in the computer game Assassin's Creed Valhalla. There's stories of Vikings attacking this thing here. This is a tower outside the museum in York. It's also known as the Eye of York, Clifford's Tower. There's stories of Vikings attacking it, but at the time that tower probably would have been built out of wood or an earlier version, cruder version of the stone tower that we see here today. So again, you can see where they're getting some of their inspiration from, and some of it, could be worse. It could be, could be so much worse. But that red band, essentially it's aesthetic. It was put in there to contrast with the white stone, and to be pretty, So that's it. Just there at the back in the wall, you can see where some of this stuff is coming from. So there are elements of accuracy going on, but it's overall it is what it is, I guess. And this actually stood out to me in particular. This whole area just seems wrong. People don't live like this unless unless there's been a natural disaster. Maybe there has been. Maybe there's been some. Looks like there's been a plague. But what's ruined the buildings? You know, why is this? And it's a small thing, but it's important. Why is this this overhang here, this eave, drooping like that? You know, there's this sort of presumption that if you, for example, build in wood, or if you're not, in this case, not a Roman, then you're going to build slightly rubbishy buildings, and that's not the case. Not necessarily the case. It's it's a really strange one. Now, especially heartbreaking when Assassin's Creed was going the educational route on later games. It is heartbreaking. It truly is heartbreaking to see so much just casually being wrong in this game. The presumptions, the assumptions are running rampant in terms of how people lived, where they lived, what they did, how they behaved, how they fought. You know, and it's a real shame because, as you say, with Assassin's Creed Origins, there was the educational version of that game that people could use in schools to explore the ancient Egyptian world. There was a version of that for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and actually, maybe it might be worthwhile doing a live stream at some point of those. I downloaded them when they were briefly recently for, there was like a sale where they were for free on the Ubisoft page, and maybe I should play the educational versions of those two games and just see what they did there in contrast to what they're doing here. Little things like, I mean, so this is actually a really good encapsulation of my biggest problem. I'll just turn up the volume just for a sec.
Nearby township, basically taking it back for the people and showing that there's.
So you have a realistic raiding party coming off the wetlands, attacking the town. Again, that was at the core of some of the risks of Saxon life in this country, in this part of the world. Absolutely perfect in that sense, brilliant. But then you have this hyper stylized. Like, why is she doing that at this moment? As you approach, like, hyper stylized elements. And the fact that the game developer, or so the quest quest manager, quest developer here uses words like that Viking culture, this kind of thing, just says that essentially how they've approached it, unfortunately, it seems to be largely aesthetic, largely mythological in that sense. The mythology of this sort of stuff with hyper violence, as we're seeing here. Which has its place in, as Nolan says, looks like they're going for a gritty Witcher 3 vibe. Precisely, it has its place in Witcher 3. And that's also, again, in one of the articles that I put below for this live stream in the video information. There's definitely, I think, PC Gamer magazine. Someone talks about how, as far as they can tell, they're going for Witcher 3, more or less. And who can blame them? It's a very popular game. It's just not historical, the talk of magical elements. It sounds like they're trying to wrap that up a little bit. Oh, this stood out to me as well, actually. Trying to wrap up the magic a little bit in the idea of hallucinating, for example. But this Slayer here, what on earth is that axe? Again, this just basically tells me they just don't care. Look at that double-headed axe. That is pure fiction. That's pure Robert E. Howard, Conan the Barbarian nonsense, and has nothing to do with what's with the world that they're portraying. This use of hammers in battle, as far as we can tell, wasn't really a thing. Especially two hammers smashing on someone's head looks very cool. It turns up in the movie Outlander, quite an interesting sci-fi Beowulf type retelling. A bit of fun, but Liv and I reviewed that a few years ago now, 5 years ago now, I think, on this channel, and you can see what we thought of it when we first saw it. But the reason why I mentioned the glass, though, in this church is that these glass windows are way too big. At this time, people were hoarding Roman glass that they might find. This is quite nice, though. Little note about the royal burial here in this chapel. But even this chapel is just a bit wrong. So for example, so the glass. Sorry, first of all, the glass. The window's too big. At this time, people were hoarding Roman glass, and they were experimenting with it. And what you find are glass windows that are about that big, where they've melted down Roman beads, laid them out on a bed of sand, and they're trying to replicate glass um, uh, drinking vessels, maybe small gaming pieces and other bits um, in in this new post-Roman world. As much as people call it the Dark Ages, it wasn't. They were very much interested in these sort of scientific experiments. In many ways, the Lindisfarne Gospels is one massive chemistry experiment. And to have a window that big would just be stunning. In fact, Ivor here should be like, what is that? Because these things just don't exist in this part of the world. Never mind just smashing it in order to have a quick escape from the building. It's well, it's a modern thing to do. It's a modern perspective on what this building might have been. The size and shape of this building is very much early Norman. This is sort of like Europeans learning from the architecture that they see in mosques, and bringing it back into Europe. The sanctuary at the back there is that sort of curved, rounded thing is something which again we see in later churches, early uh, Norman and later early mid medieval, if that makes any sense, structures. At this time, churches would have been quite boxy. In fact, some of the earliest churches were just essentially a small square room in which a priest stood, and they would offer services and things like communion to people who were sitting outside the box. And then the box would become the sanctuary over time, and then where people were sitting outside would become the nave. That comes from a same root as the word navel, the idea that it's almost like an upturned ship, the rest of the church that people sit in. Um, in the boat, as it were, looking towards the sanctuary of the church. This is a wonderful representation of a much later church, a Norman building. It has no place in the 9th century. it's it's got the whole thing has a scale that's just wrong. I mean, even if we come to this wedding scene here, so after the wedding, they're all gathered in this wooden structure, which it's hard to tell precisely what it is. It looks maybe it's meant to be a big long house or something, but the size of that door is massive. Everything is too big. And that's because it looks better in a game. It feels better to walk into a big space. It gives you maybe a culturally appropriate sense of what it would be like to go into a long house, to represent it as being truly massive in the game. But it's just not real. Um, and on the one hand, I sometimes hear people saying, "Hey, but it's Assassin's Creed. Hey, what do you expect? Hey." Um, just noticed the glass windows in Kingdom Come the other day. Very realistic. Precisely, yes, precisely. Um, but just because it's Assassin's Creed doesn't give it license to be completely nonsensical. And this, again, is another summary image for me, which is just what is that tower? That architecture with the big blocks on the edges, this sort of it's a slightly it's it's not actually quite from any time, that particular tower, that particular shape of window. It's fantasy. And a structure being that big in the landscape, made of stone, and also actually at this point being ruined, not even being in the process of being built, is ridiculous. I do like the waterways. I think that they're very well done. Um, but for every positive that we see, actually the symbol here is a very recognizable symbol. The raven or I've forgotten who it was that has it. It's used a lot by reenactors on their shields these days. But that's a symbol that's described in historical sources. So that's quite nice to see. But for every good thing that we see 5, 10, 15, 20, bad things, and it just pulls me out of it. I don't even mind all this, this sort of speculative carvings on the back of the boat. You know, this is where you can have fun in a game like this. This is where you can let your freak flag fly, because we know that there are ships that would have all manner of bows and stern decoration, and you can, because there's evidence for them going nuts with the decoration. Yeah, go nuts, do what you want. That doesn't have to be evidenced, and that's not the type of thing that I think that bothers most archaeologists who are interested in this period. You can have fun within the bounds of a fairly well understood world, um, but you can't have your post Roman early early medieval cake and uh, eat your even bigger cake, Knut. Like, I think that's it. Maybe it is Knut. Yeah, Knut. So I thought you were calling me a name for a second. Mistyped it. No. Yeah, King Knut. Yes, I think it might be Knut's Raven. Yeah. But you can't have that element of your cake and add on to it a huge, creme pâtissier kind of buffet of proper, later medieval stuff, and throw in a bit of fantasy and expect it to work. And I think that's the problem, is it doesn't feel um, coherent, which again is a real shame, because I very much enjoyed in previous Assassin's Creed slightly losing myself. Now, arguably, there are problems throughout the series. The way that they use, for example, plague doctors in, actually no, sorry, that's Brotherhood, isn't it? Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Revelations is the one I was talking about earlier. In Brotherhood is dodgy. That's not quite the right time to have that type of plague doctor turning up. But everything around that plague doctor, everything around in terms of the architecture and that sort of stuff, was you have to be very careful when you write Knut. Yes, was good, and it pulled you into this. Actually, it pulled you into a world that was truly interesting, a Rome that isn't often seen. A Rome that's simultaneously rising in the Renaissance, but also living amongst. And actually, that's where you do have people living in, for example, the Old Forum, and trying to make their way in that world. In this instance, they're trying to bring in some of these elements. I mean, this is really good. This rap battle, as it were, this battle of wits is this is culturally spot on. So some of it is great, but then having people living, for example, in particular, living in Roman ruins just isn't accurate. For the most part, not least because they were dangerous. These were things which were absolutely collapsing, and especially early on, people didn't know how to fix them, didn't know how to safely rebuild them. They lived in awe of them, but they well, again, Wall's End is an excellent example. They lived about a mile and a half away from the Roman ruins, and then set up a new place, place that was closer to the river, that served their trade and travel needs much more closely. And also, even on the same river, for example, in this, in the local instance, you could have an Old English settlement name like Wall's End, right next to. In fact, the next one along would be Walka, Waldkir, the marsh by the wall, by the ruins of Hadrian's Wall. And then you have Baika or Bikia, which was the farm on the marsh. Those two are Viking place names. So it's a missed opportunity. And the thing is, I'm not quite sure.
Unless it touches on my flighting, then heed every word.
I'm not quite sure how I feel about this game in so much as, do I want to try it? So I know people who pre-ordered it. And I don't blame them for doing so. I think there's probably enough there to keep you going. But I'm just not sure. Well, I suppose I could be really cheeky and try and ask for a review copy. I did get a review copy of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, to be fair, on the PlayStation 4. But I'm not sure that they would give me a review copy now. I've been so publicly negative about this game. But it's loving criticism. I love the franchise, and I love this period of history. I just wish that they were doing a little bit better. I don't know. I feel as though I've been rambling on now for a while. I've definitely been streaming for a good while. Unfortunately, the Windows reformatted itself, so I'm not quite sure how long I've been streaming for. But if are there any thoughts? Is anyone else excited for having seen this gameplay? Did you see the leaked gameplay that we linked to previously on the community tab? That actually the leaked gameplay elements, which were similar to this stuff, had the siege at Berg Castle and so on and so forth. I mean, see this, yeah, this is the stuff that's just the most heinous and just gross. It's 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 just it's not the Vikings. And actually, if they called this, if they made a whole new franchise, like Witcher, and they wanted to make even an alternate history, if they wanted to make some sort of, in a universe where people's souls lived on the outside of their bodies, do a Philip Pullman type thing, have something that's separate from our history. This is wonderful in that case. But the fact that it's all just a bit wrong is very irritating, and I wonder to what extent Ubisoft are actually going to feel that. I mean, at the moment, obviously, they have as I mentioned right at the beginning of this stream, problems going on within their company. Senior executives stepping down. I think the lead creative head on this game had to step down due to accusations linked with his proclivities and personal life, shall we say, allegedly and all that kind of thing. Have to be very careful, don't we? And I wonder to what extent they'll feel any backlash against this game straying too far. There's that wonderful wall again. Probably my favourite part of the whole stream is that wall with that's realistic. That's stonework that's been borrowed from the Romans and would have had plaster stuck onto those zigzags. Beautiful. But I wonder if they'll actually take on board criticism. If enough people actually say this game is fantasy, this is fantastical, this is not actually what we want from Assassin's Creed, will they listen to that? Just as they are having to listen, at least performatively for the moment, to concerns about behaviour of management. Hopefully that will have a knock-on effect for things like crunch and aspects of working conditions for people as well. It's I don't know, but that's an awful lot for a company to take on. So maybe they'll just see this as a win because it's going to sell. It's going to sell very well. As I say, I know people who've pre-ordered it already. So it's a complicated matter, isn't it? Can't say I'm excited to play this, says Thomas Evans. Yeah, me neither. They should have hired me as to advise. Yeah, if only that would have been a dream job to advise on this sort of stuff. Bring in some of my friends and colleagues, really consult. And crucially, and where I don't know something, I would be more than happy to phone a friend, 'Cause I don't know everything, of course I don't. But the problem is this looks so bad that they clearly haven't actually consulted anyone really. They've just maybe they have, and there's been some clip notes, oh yeah, I really like the idea of them reusing Roman ruins, blah 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 blah. I don't know. Was excited about the premise, but not anymore. Says Smig. Don't think I'll be getting it. It's more like the Vikings TV series. It is. I think Ubisoft is using the Viking era as wallpaper to sell the game. It has nothing to do with the historical accuracy, unfortunately. No, I agree. Wanted to make a fun romp like a God of War or God of War. Yeah, no, I agree. But then again, actually, God of War, and this is where my point comes in. Is actually I enjoy God of War, but where it pulls on Norse literature and mythology, because they do it in a way which is self-consistent within the world that they've created. Kratos doesn't live in our world really. He doesn't feel like it. He lives in a world that's just it's the world of the gods, and so it's separated from ours, and therefore they can do lots of fun things and go big. Not quite as big and ridiculous as this sword, mind you, but anyway. So God of War, I like that game. Even like the the stuff where they bring in Balder. I thought that was really clever actually. When I first met him, I was like, is this Balder? Is it Balder? And then when it became clear that it was, I was like, yeah, I like it. I enjoy that. So they can. There are ways of doing it. Just don't do it in Assassin's Creed. And maybe that thing about a Viking wallpaper is true in so much as they're clearly getting this is clearly probably a graphically updated version of the same engine that they've been using for the past two games. Ever since they took that relatively big hiatus from having annual releases and came back with Assassin's Creed Origins. It's clear that this RPG heavier, less bounded, less claustrophobic. Because let's face it, if you take this game and you compare it to the original Assassin's Creed or this sort of game, the original Assassin's Creed does feel quite claustrophobic. But that thing about having to set up your assassinations, that Hitman gameplay, to bring in another game franchise, was part of the beauty of it. And maybe if they want to go down this route, they could call it, maybe it's Assassin's Creed, Tales of Assassin's Creed, or some, do something that's a bit separate, because this is clearly moving towards that Witcher kind of world. It created a great world set in mythology. God of War did. Absolutely, Thomas, precisely, and hopefully that's what can come across from these sorts of criticisms, is that it's not, you can have fun, but there should be rules when you're playing with history. You can go crazy and go completely off piste. Go wild with your designs and with your with your plans for a game, but give us a reason. Give us a reason to buy into that. Don't tell us you're set in a historical environment and then show so many things that are just wrong and incorrect. I feel as though I'm just ranting now, so and maybe that's why people wanted to hear, that's what they want to see. Give them what they want. Rant more. Let the anger flow. Good. I can feel your anger. And but that's the other thing, though, isn't it? It's not anger. It's disappointment. I'm very disappointed by what I'm seeing, because there are little moments. But I mean, again, right down to. I mean, some of this is it's so graphically violent that I wonder how that just sort of this is a more of a personal query. How does that sort of violence map with this sort of counter element of seeing stats and life bars above the enemies that you're killing? How does, jamming an axe into a man's torso, headbutting him, kicking him back, and throwing axes at him actually um, actually relate to the gaminess of this? Now that don't get me wrong, I'm not squeamish. I don't mind violence in games, but again, it has a question as to what type of game does this game want to be? What kind of game is it trying to be? How quickly does that longboat move? If it's like a speedboat, it is quite quick, isn't it? Let's quickly go back to that. Yeah, it's like a speedboat in the bayou, isn't it? Let's see. You expect alligators and a big fan on the back, don't you? And a very strange pose. But yes, what kind of game is it trying to be? And is it the kind of game that we expect? It's definitely not the kind of game that I was hoping for from this world. And restricted area, Kingsbury. And I suppose that's about it, really, in that sense. I actually plan on revisiting this query, actually, this idea of what kind of games do we want to have, and what's the relationship between history and games, in a video with a chap called Tristan Boyle. He is the Archaeologist on Twitter, and he's been. We've both been actually thinking about this question of for a start, do history games have to be fun? No, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying games shouldn't be fun. Of course they should. But why is it that the fun is found first, and then, as Thomas was saying there, a wallpaper is put on top of that fun later on, as opposed to creating the world and thinking about the rules of that world, and then finding the fun within it? Other examples would be, well, I think a game that concerned me the most as a historian, putting myself as a gamer to one side for a moment, but as a historian and archaeologist, was Battlefield 1. A few years ago, during the First World War centenary celebrations, we had this game that was well, making the First World War fun, as opposed to uh, something which was a bit closer to a simulation. And the question is, to what extent is this actually okay? Because in many ways, actually moving towards, for example, a Witcher type formula does give you license, and it does mean that you're not going to I suppose at the worst, especially if you're dealing in the period like the First World War, actually end up really truly offending people or hurting people. In this instance, obviously there's not going to be anyone. There might be a great many uh, historians and archaeologists who are pissed off, but you're not going to get people go, you offended my great grandfather or something. That's not the issue here. But it's this pursuit of fun at the expense of well, actually, it's very much what I talk about in the film reviews. There's this perception that you can either make a great movie or an entertaining movie, or you can make an accurate movie, which may be Oscar worthy, Oscar bait. But you can't do both. That's the perception, and yet I think people like Ridley Scott actually could do quite a good job of challenging some of that stuff. And this tension between the two is definitely something that we see coming to the fore in a game like this, where they clearly didn't see, well, either they weren't consulting the right people, or they didn't see the potential in the period as it would have been to have the gameplay that they wanted. So presumably they've come in with a gameplay agenda. There's our weird tower again at Berg Castle. They come in with a gameplay agenda, which is largely built on the Origins and Odyssey engine, and they've tried to find any way they possibly can to meet all of those gameplay elements, to tick those gameplay boxes with the veneer of the period. And is that appropriate? Is that right? Or should actually game developers be looking to the period for inspiration as to how to play a game, or as to how to make a game out of it? I don't know. Maybe that's too much work. Did you see 1917? Seemed very grounded and realistic. I loved it. I have not seen 1917 yet. Lots of people recommended it to me, though, including family members. So we will be watching it soon, Mr. Soup and I. I've seen lots of making ofs. I'm very interested in the cinematography of that movie, that movie. There's this Sam Mendes's attempt to make it look like it's one ongoing shot. It's very interesting. So yes, I definitely want to watch it. Definitely. Actually, here, look at this. Sorry, look. I didn't even see that when we watched this earlier. Want a bit? Nope, too far. Oh, come on.
We have this big open region of East.
Here we go. They're rebuilding the Roman stonework.
So before we head off
to
Oswald's wedding, what do you say we head
it's
out,
the wrong
have some
time.
fun, and see what we can get into in the open world?
It's the wrong time.
That sounds great.
And also, you've got to make up your mind. Can you rebuild a Roman fort, or do you have a great big wooden longhouse like that? Yeah, there are reasons that people choose between. And is that a longhouse with a Viking ship outside it? So yeah, there's a ship on display. That's kind of cool. I'm not sure. Not sure precisely how historically accurate that is, unless maybe it's waiting to be incorporated into a burial. There's an unfortunate jump cut there. But yeah, just there's a Viking ship resting outside. But the thing is, what can you do? Do you build? Is this a culture that can rebuild in stone? If so, why aren't they doing it everywhere? Or is it a culture that's building truly cathedral-esque? And maybe this is the building that's in the wedding later on. Cathedral-esque wooden structures. In which case, why are they bothering with the stone walls? Is that cultural inconsistency? And there we have the tower just over there, top right. What is that tower? It's just historical nonsense. Ahistorical nonsense. Didn't they often dismantle Roman structures for their own uses? No, not often. No, they did. They did. The church could. So again, as I sort of mentioned earlier on in the live stream, there was why weren't you there? No, I'm joking, but no, but there was a move by the church to reuse stone, in particular, for example, from Roman forts and villas. Escombe Church is well worth. In fact, let's show you. Let's take a look at Escombe Church. That's why we have the internet here. Escombe Church is a beautiful example of yeah, Saxon ingenuity, but it's small scale. Look at it. It's a blocky building. It's very 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 small, and um it's using. I mean, this porch was a later addition. These pointy windows are a later addition. It was very very simple, and inside the church, you start to get a bit of a sense of, oh, come on, show me inside. Well, that's a bit too small. A bit of a sense of that box that I was talking about. The idea that early Saxon churches had essentially, let's zoom in on that. That'll do. Had essentially a box out of which the priest did communion. So this would have been at some point just that room there, in which the priest would preach to the people outside that little room, and actually originally probably just altars in the middle of a field, preach and give communion to people out here, and eventually this structure was built. But again, look, little square window there. Wouldn't have had any glass in originally. That window at the end is probably a later addition. Um, the stonework here has some of those zigzags that we pointed out earlier on in the stream as well. Those come on, the pictures are all tiny. Escombe Church, the zigzags on the stonework, which were cut into the stone in order to allow Romans craftsmen to put plasters on. Plaster on rather, stucco plaster. But look, it's very boxy, and maybe I think that window probably might be original. The pointy ones, later Gothic architecture inspired additions here and here. That porch, absolutely not original. So basically a rectangle and a small square, and that small square would have been the original church, essentially the sanctuary. So they would, in some small cases, use Roman stone, but not on a large scale. People weren't building their houses out of this. People weren't even building their farms out of this. Maybe they would use it for dry stone walling, this kind of thing. But yeah, the Saxon world, especially the world of Beowulf, of the 9th century, of normal people, was wooden. It wasn't stone. But also the wood wasn't that scale there. I want a cathedral with gleaming spires and glorious arches. We can do that. We can do a box. Okay. Well, precisely. But it was experimenting. As I say, in the case of Benedict Biscop, it was experimenting in the so-called Roman style. They were trying to relearn and trying to revive building skills that they could see in the ruins around them, but ruins which were often far too dangerous and far too far gone to live in safely. That's the back of Escombe Church. Again, I think that door is a later addition. Having a door through the other side of the church became fashionable. Certain services and rituals would have a second entrance in the north. So you'd come in through the south, and there'd be a door opposite on the north side of the church. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, hopefully that's vaguely interesting. If you ever get a chance to go to Escombe, actually, I strongly recommend it. Who was buried on church grounds? Was it just monks and nobles? Believers. If you were a Christian, then you could be buried in a churchyard. That said, though, there's also quite a lot of evidence of people who have other and varied beliefs ending up in churchyards as well. Sometimes we think possibly from a battle context, so it may well be that in one of these sort of skirmishes of 20, 50 people fighting, the dead might not be necessarily identifiable. Maybe if they get an axe to the head or something. And so sometimes you see people who might not have been Christian ending up in Christian burial grounds from this time. But yeah, you don't have to be a monk or noble to be buried. Proximity to the church building, though, is clearly, that's a hot ticket, as it were. So if you're a bit more wealthy, then yeah, you're going to be closer to the building, or even in the building if you're important to the community and the saint. Creating and quarrying and stone dressing industry from the ground up would be a task. It would be. It would be. But this is the weird thing as well, is that we need to remember that, because again, this old term, the Dark Ages, was used quite liberally for a long, long time. In fact, it's used in the in the promotional material for Assassin's Creed Valhalla. The Dark Ages, the ages when all light and civilization left the world. And that's not the case. They weren't necessarily starting from absolute scratch. Again, they had the blueprint. They could see Roman ruins around them, and there were small scale stonemasonry skills in the world, further south in Europe on trade routes, and also actually some carpentry skills, it seems, had crossover. So we've recently seen in a church building that was unearthed, I think about 2 years ago now, on Lindisfarne, a stone structure that was clearly built by people who were accustomed to working with wood. Well, say clearly. The evidence is compelling, looking at how they've treated the stone, that they're more accustomed to building with wood, in the terms of the shapes that they've made in the stone, and they're treating it like wood. So it's possible to have some transferable skills, to maybe bring in a little bit of quarrying expertise, to maybe experiment with the stones that are in farmers' fields, this kind of thing, that are already kind of pre-shaped by glacial action, back in the Ice Age, rolling rocks along the ground. It's not you're not starting from zero, but it would be quite a task. I agree, definitely, especially if you want to start building normal, shops and people's houses in stone, without a doubt. Smig, I find it almost negligent when the game implies it's depicting a historical setting, but then smuggles fantasy instead of recognizing what a great opportunity they had to teach history to so many kids. And that's it. That's it. It's the otherness of the period that should be the surprise. That should be the delight in this sort of game. It should be the unknown. It should be, and I think I've talked about this in the past, but it bears repeating that, for example, when I teach the Romans even in a primary school setting, I emphasize the ways that the Romans were not like us. Because one of the reasons the Romans are very popular is that people can, especially people in the Western world, people especially in Britain, can relate to them in some way. Especially Victorian people did. This idea that they brought civilization wherever they went. This idea that they had laws and baths and money and a well-developed legal system, not just laws, but a whole legal profession. The family unit was very important to Romans, as it was in Christian Victorian times, and we kind of inherited a lot of that. But actually, not only when you start to pull apart some of that, does it not necessarily only apply to the Romans. For example, cleanliness was very important in Iron Age Europe before the Romans arrived. It was very important amongst, for example, the Vikings. Incredibly important to be clean and presentable. But also, actually, things like the family unit in the Roman world were brutal. It was entirely possible as the father of the family to simply decree that one of your children should be put to death. I don't like that kid. They've done something to annoy me or to dishonor my family, because essentially in the Roman context, the father is essentially the head priest of a family cult, making sure that the current generation doesn't ruin the reputation that his forefathers in particular have forged for the family, have built up over many years. And so you could just have your kid put to death. Now that's utterly alien, and yet the kids in the primary school, they love it. We'll set up a Roman family, and we'll even say, okay, so the daughter goes off to learn to read and write, because the father, the modern kid, has presumed that the father would never allow a girl to read and write. That's not true. It was entirely up to the family. Education was accessible if you had enough money. But she goes off, meets a pedagogue, A wandering teacher. Ped means foot, so someone who's walking around on their feet, as it were, who teaches, and she learns to read and write. She writes a curse that maybe kills her father in the workshop setting. And they love it, and not at no point do we talk about Roman. Well, we do at the end, but for most of it, it's not about Roman soldiers. It's not about how they're just like us. It's actually about how they're not like us, and that's where the fun is. That's where the intrigue is. That's what pulls them in even further. That's what pulled me in. That's why I'm an archaeologist. That's what pulls other people into this stuff. Is what's new about the past, to coin a phrase. The term grounded takes on a darker meaning. Yeah. People think grounded is gritty. People tend to think grounded is well, hyper stylized violence. And it's not. Grounded can be again taking. Well, as you say, Beck, fact is stranger than fiction. Excuse me. Precisely. And history is full of interesting little tidbits like that. And that's where the gameplay could have been found in this sort of game. It's where it should be found in this sort of game. But also, I mean, in that sense, thank goodness, thank goodness that they're not doing Romans in Britain, because they would do precisely the sort of thing that I fear that they would do. They would do that thing that people presume they already know, as opposed to actually engaging with it. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, I suppose one positive I did pick up on here as well. Something that I forgot to mention, is this is so people who just or joined me more recently the stream. This is Oswald's wife in the game. So she's a Dane who's marrying Oswald. Drinking games, that looks like fun. But it's Oswald's clothes. If we can get a close-up of them, turns up in a bit. There we go. I quite like that as a wedding outfit for a king of East Anglia. I think, well, yeah, East Anglia. I quite like it. It's detailed where it should be. It's plain where it should be. This sort of but and it's hard to know. Is he marrying her as a Christian Saxon, or is he engaging? Because it's Ivor's friend who does the wedding ceremony, which is presumably a Danish pagan ceremony, which incidentally we don't know a lot about. In the Viking TV series, they made up some very interesting speculations, which I wholeheartedly think is fun. Again, there's room to have fun there. But in this instance, maybe he's dressed relatively neutrally. That said, though, the fact that he's also wearing colours that are it's weird, isn't it? Because sometimes pale colours can mean that you are wealthy, or that you are removed from, for example, working on the land. But at this point in time, especially if you're trying to really dig down into that sort of, if you're a pagan king in particular, you're going to want to wear rich reds and purples and things, and really show off at your wedding. So it's interesting. I think his clothes here are interesting. I think they're probably telling us something about his character. It seems as though he's a relatively merciful, thinking type of person. I think that's reflected in his clothes, which is quite nice. The belt is quite good as well. The buckle, it's a tiny little thing, but the buckle's quite nice, quite nicely done. The null, not null binding, the tablet weaving that we see as details on his sleeves, on his collar, again quite good. It's the sort of thing that again you'll see reenactors doing all the time. So that's a little positive there. There you go. So and I think for the first third of this stream, I was mainly positive. I was looking for reasons to be optimistic beyond this opening battle scene, and I've come back around to being essentially disappointed. And it's a shame, such a shame. Oh, Smig, €20. Goodness me, my heart is touched. Thank you. Thank you, brother. Thank you. That's my first ever donation on a live stream. Do you know, I actually forgot that was possible. Thank you very much. That was utterly unexpected. Thank you. Cheers. But yeah, hopefully this has been good. This has been worthwhile and interesting, and and as I say, we're gonna follow this up at some point in the near future with this question of as to why or how it is that historical games, whether or not historical games have to be fun before they're historically accurate, and how it is that maybe within a historical game it is possible to find the fun, to find the gameplay little hooks and surprising, delightful niches that I'm sure so many developers want to get stuck into, beyond the aesthetics. I mean, I don't want to make Beck stand out here as a represent your entire industry, but as someone who's involved in gameplay design, it's interesting that that you seem to be genuinely interested in some of the things that can be pointed out in a critique of gameplay. It's heartening. I find it useful and interesting to see that actually there are people who care about authenticity in that sense. So I don't think it's a hopeless cause. I think it's entirely possible for people to do better, and that's all we know. That's all we want. We just want people to do better because they have such a wonderful opportunity here. Exactly, yeah. Slap. It's a slap round the face, isn't it? Keep doing what you're doing. I plan to, so long as it is possible. I will be happily doing what I'm doing. I suppose before I go, are there any final questions or notions? I feel as though I should, especially after that wonderful Smig surprise, just add a little bit of extra time here. Any questions about what we talked about today, or anything that's come to mind beyond some of the other questions? If you ever have any questions about the development side of things, I can try to answer what I can. Cool. Okay, cool. Well, actually, I mean, maybe Beck, feels like I'm asking you to marry me in front of everyone here. The pressure's on. No, but maybe at some point following that planned future video on fun gaming, maybe actually it could be interesting to have a bit of a chat about game design and sort of plug that into these sorts of questions, because if you're up for that, I would love to have a bit of a filmed chat, maybe even a live stream chat. Shock horror, goodness me, that could be interesting. And also, I would also love to know more about why it is that people fall into those sorts of traps. In terms of game development, why it is that it's so compelling to have, or so tempting to have things like the life bars and the arrow and the numbers and this kind of thing. And who's that serving? Is it serving? Is it actually genuinely serving the game playing public? Do gamers require that, or is it actually more akin to what we sometimes see in TV production, where the producers kind of presume what it is that the public want and feed it to them accordingly, and then it becomes a feedback loop. Of course the public only want this, it's all we ever give them. I'm interested in that, definitely. And of course, we wouldn't have to touch on any case studies in the case of you, Beck, which have anything to do with your work or the company that you work for. We can be very vague in that sense. So yeah. What's your favorite historical video game? Do you know, it's Stronghold. And actually, tell you what, while we're here, I'll just quickly boot that up. Stronghold is my favorite historical video game. It's not particularly new. It's not massively hyper accurate, but it's also not too offensive either. It's good fun. Stronghold. There you go. And I'm currently actually in a level.
Greetings, sire.
Greetings, sire.
Your stronghold awaits you.
Let's see. Combat. Can I upload a game? No, I want to load the game. There you go, load save games. And it is Hooning the Devil, yeah.
Loading!
This is my most recent castle that I've been working on. There you go. Stronghold. Analytics play a big part of it. Numbers show people want like react to a certain thing, and producers higher ups want more of X. Okay. Yeah, and I can imagine that's very difficult to work with. So I'll close this now because people who just joined the stream will be very, very confused.
Retire, my lord.
Retire, my lord. Gee, blimey, you know the graphics in the new Assassin's Creed game don't look very good. But yeah, so strong. Yeah, strong, that's interesting to hear, definitely. And it'd be nice to sort of pull that apart a bit in a conversation. Stronghold is an absolute classic. Yeah. You love the original. The original's pretty good. Crusader, I played a lot of many years ago. Stronghold 2, I keep on trying to get into that game. For a long time, I didn't have a computer that could really do it justice, and some of the complications that they've introduced into the gameplay are a bit confusing to me. But I keep on returning to it every now and then. And then also there's Legends as well, isn't there? Not that we've gone horribly off topic now in talking about in Stronghold. But yeah, Stronghold Legends, I haven't even loaded that up. But again, that involves magic. It involves magic, maybe, you know. It's connections. Anyway, I'm completely off topic now. Stronghold is amazing. Assassin's Creed Valhalla doesn't look as though it's going to be, but I remain to be happily disproved as and when the game comes out. Thank you guys for watching. Thanks again to Smig for watching. It's such a wonderful surprise. And yeah, if you have any questions, put them in the comments below. I'll happily answer them in text form, and we'll try and incorporate them into future videos on this question about the balance between entertainment and accuracy in computer games. It's been fun. Thanks for turning up, everyone. And yeah, until next time, do take care. Bye-bye.